ally the Soviet Union and its communist supporters in Southeast Asia. In short, the Hooks were fighting the Japanese. The U.S. were fighting the Japanese. The U.S. used the conflicts of the Hooks and Japanese to their advantage, but then the U.S. and Hooks were left facing each other, and while they had a common enemy, they were not friends. They did not agree with each other, so now the U.S. had a new enemy to deal with in the area. The Philippine government, being allies with the U.S., did not want the Hooks there either, so it became a conflict of the Philippine officials and the U.S. against the Hooks. There were conventional fights, but that soon changed to a war of the minds shortly after. Enter Lieutenant Colonel Edward G. Lansdale. Lansdale arrived in the Philippines using his actual job as an Air Force officer and advisor to the Philippine President Ramon Magsaysay. For the record, he had transferred from the Army to being commissioned as an officer to the Air Force previously. What he didn't tell anyone there was that he was actually working for the CIA. He set up operations and built a team that would assist him with his operation. Lansdale began studying the local lore and superstitions of the people there, and that is where he formulated his plan of attack. So, the voices from the heavens? Lansdale would have a plane fly through the clouds that had a large loudspeaker attached to it and shout down the curses on the people who would help the Hooks. The eyes of God? Late at night, his team would move through the village and paint eyes on the homes of everyone that lived around a Hook supporter. They had previously gathered information on who the Hook supporters were, so they knew who to target and aim the ominous eyes at. As far as the terrifying Aswang creature, well, the dead body on the patrol path, blood completely drained with 2 bite marks on his neck, was very real, no doubt about it. It turned out, however, that the Aswang was Lansdale himself, in a sense. Lansdale wanted a group of Philippine soldiers moved from an area, but was afraid that the open area left would open it up to the Hooks, who would claim it for themselves and then kill any American sympathizers. So, Lansdale had his men spread rumors about the existence of the Aswang nearby to the villagers, who would then tell the Hook fighters, as they spoke with them directly. Once Lansdale felt the Aswang fear was overflowing, he unleashed his hit squad, who set up the attack. These were the words of Lansdale himself when describing what they did. The Psy-War squad set up an ambush along the trail used by the Hooks. When a Hook patrol came along the trail, the ambushers silently snatched the last man of the patrol, their move unseen in the dark night. They punctured his neck with 2 holes, vampire fashion, held the body up by the heels, drained it of blood, and put the corpse back on the trail. When the Hooks returned to look for the missing man and found their bloodless comrade, every member of the patrol believed that the Aswang had got him, and that one of them would be next if they remained on that hill. When daylight came, the whole Hook squadron moved out of the vicinity. Pretty extreme, yes, but it worked. Lansdale wrote in his autobiography that they would do this. The Hooks would find their fallen comrade, pack up, move to another hill, and they would repeat the operation. This, along with some logistical and internal issues among them, wore on their morale and wore them down in general. With the PSYOP mission accomplishing its task, they launched more search and destroy operations that only intensified, until most of the Hook Rebellion and their leader, Louis Theroux, surrendered in 1954 in order to receive a pardon. The Hooks were a tough, resilient bunch and hard to break. It took voices from heaven, the eyes of God, and an evil creature from the darkness to finally get them to leave and ultimately give up their fight. All thanks to a guy who used to work in marketing. The year is 1969, Vietnam. It is late in the night and the jungle is alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. The humidity is stifling and there is a serious tension in the air. This was the Vietnam War. Patrols from the North Vietnamese and the Americans wandered through the foliage or were waiting quietly in foxholes and tunnels. Gunfire and explosions could light up the night with chaos and destruction at any moment. However, on this night, you don't hear voices, yelling, gunfire, or explosions. Suddenly, piercing the deep darkness of the jungle, you hear at an ear-splitting volume this. It was the sound of the dead crying out. These were angry spirits moving through the moonless night. This was Operation Wandering Soul. Operation Wandering Soul was a PSYOP tactic the American Army and Navy employed from 1969 to 1970 in the Vietnam area, meant to demoralize the Viet Cong troops. It exploited the local beliefs that a soul wanders when its body has not been buried properly at home. U.S. engineers worked for weeks to create the haunting sounds and hired South Vietnamese soldiers to record their voices over it for authenticity. They recorded them in an echo chamber to give it the spectral feel it needed. They would then be broadcast throughout the jungles and from helicopters flying above to fool the North Vietnamese soldiers into thinking the souls of Viet Cong soldiers killed in the field were suffering in the afterlife and walking throughout the area crying out in pain. Frank Snepp, a CIA assessor of the North Vietnamese policy in the 70s, said psychological influencers linked to ancestral land were the most persuasive in Vietnam. He stated, the most effective psyops directed at the North Vietnamese army were always those that reminded them that their ancestral lands were far to the north, and if they were killed in the south, their souls would wander forever in limbo. Although this operation lasted for 1 year, other operations continued to be put in place later utilizing the superstitions and spiritual beliefs of the people in that area. A 1972 CIA document entitled LOC HAK 512-7212 stated, "We are playing on North Vietnamese superstitions by claiming that the wandering souls of their unburied dead in the south are guiding our bombs." Concerning Operation Wandering Soul, the only tape that has ever been released to the public is called Ghost Tape 10, and it contained a mixture of very creepy and off-putting sounds, as you heard, with Buddhist funeral music, the voices of a girl saying, "Come home, Daddy," and disembodied male voices telling them to go home and be reunited with your loved ones, so the living would not suffer the phantom's same fate. It was filled with statements that told the soldiers not to make the same mistakes the now-deceased spirits had in life by fighting. One segment of the clip stated, "My friends, I come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead. It's hell. Hell. It is a senseless death. How senseless? Senseless. But when I realized the truth, it was too late. Too late. Friends, while you are still alive, there is still a chance you will be reunited with your loved ones. Do you hear what I say? Go home. Go home, my friends. Hurry, hurry. If not, you will end up like me. Go home, my friends, before it is too late. Go home, my friends." This is the audio clip of that moment from Ghost Tape 10.
Các bạn của tôi trở về để nói cho các bạn biết rằng tôi đã chết. Địa ngục, cái chết thật là oan uổng, thật là vô nghĩa, thật là nhưng lúc tôi biết thì đã quá muộn rồi. Các bạn ơi, các bạn còn sống, còn trong ngày các bạn gặp được người thân yêu của các bạn đừng buồn nữa. Trở về các bạn, muốn mau đi, nhất quyết mau đi, lìa bỏ đi các bạn. Nếu không thì tránh được cái chết cảm thương như tôi. Trở về các bạn ơi.
They would play this all throughout the night to keep the Viet Cong fighters from getting any sleep. However, the Viet Cong eventually caught on to what was happening. They realized that the voices and sounds they heard were not coming from the other side, but rather from the other side, the Americans. They figured out they were hooking up speakers to the trees or broadcasting them from the helicopters above. While this sounds like it ended up being a failed PSYOP mission, and some will say it was today, it did still have some effect. Two things happened. One, while the soldiers knew it was fake, it still angered or upset them to hear something they held in very high regard culturally being used by their enemy. Two, this would cause many of them to start firing on the direction the sound was coming from. This would give away sniper positions and other troop locations. So while they didn't fall for it per se, they did let the American troops know where they were located with their responsive gunfire at the noises. They eventually stopped this operation, and the response to this operation has been mixed. Some say it was successful, while others have called it a failed mission. The Army concept team who created Wandering Soul and the Ghost Tape admitted that the Viet Cong were aware of what was going on, but still held their ground on saying it was a success, even though they had no resulting evidence to back up the claim. Even if this didn't send the enemy running or retreating, it most assuredly wore on their morale and mental state at the time. And sometimes wars are won by making tiny nicks in your enemy over and over for a long time, rather than one giant slice. So while Operation Wandering Soul didn't have the same historical success as Operation Mincemeat or the Trojan Horse, it still has gone down in history as yet another creative conjuration and concept within the fascinating realm of Mildeck and PsyOps in times of war. This has been a series of some of the more well-known operations throughout history, and there are multitudes more that can be researched. So just remember, if you see a tree move, hear a strange bump in the night, or suspect that strange bird in the tree is watching you a little too closely, you might have stumbled into the middle of a clandestine operation at work. We hope you enjoyed this two-part episode into the fascinating world of deceptions that played on the minds of the opposition in wars and conflicts. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Trivial.